Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied, with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tavach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and is dedicated in honor and loving memory of Rab Shmuel Yosef Littman Plotkin, Olav Shalom, who is really the person who initiated this program, learning Tanya every Saturday night, every Motzei Shabbos, on the radio and online, reaching people from all over the world. So we are now in chapter 29, middle of Perek Chof Tes, and the Alter Rebbe, to sum up where we're at, is in a way threading a needle in understanding the paradox of the Beinoni, Sefer Shel Beinonim, remember. And what is the Beinoni? The Beinoni is someone like each one of us. Midas kol adam v'achareh kol adam yimshech. The Alter Rebbe explained earlier in chapter 14. It's the personality and character of every person. Every person has a nefesh habamis, an animal soul, and has the capacity to control that animal soul. Basically self-control, self-mastery. A tzaddik is not in everybody's capacity. You have to have special resources, special neshama. A rasha is someone who gives in and does not exercise that self-control. But a Beinoni is someone who does. So a human being was created naturally, as he explained in chapter 12, b'tevet heldosei, with the ability of meich shal talav, self-control. So when you think about the Beinoni, who is he? The tzaddik is clearly a person, as we learned, is defined by his neshama. Hu atzmei, will you go back to the Lashon we talked about Hillel, where he said that the body is zor nechshav etzlei. It's like a stranger by him. Why? Because he is transformed his nefesh habamis into the nefesh halikis, and therefore, he's basically a divine soul in a body. A rasha is someone, meaning a person who does not exercise the self-control, is someone, like he said, or Beinoni even, who does exercise self-control. He is the nefesh habamis hu ha'adam. But we also know he has a chelik elikam mal mamish, as we discussed at length. And that's his core essence, his divine soul. But his animal soul also defines his personality. So the core, if you go all the way to that, some in the words of the Rambam, it's the end of chapter 2 in Hilchos Gerushin, he says that every Jew wants to do Torah mitzvahs and doesn't want to do Avedas. And that's why it's the Yetzer that is forcing him to be not natural. But once he does have a nefesh habamis, it's not an outside force. It is also defining him. And that's what the Alter Rebbe was saying when we continued. He said, since the animal soul was not transformed, it's a force that defines him. It's not his core definition, you can say. That's his divine soul. So how did he ha'adam atzmei? And why is that relevant? Because this is coming to explain why, when a person is mevatish, strikes, and we'll call it undermines, like we learned about Bitush himself, like he was striking a wood that is not catching fire. Mevatshenese, as we learned from the Zohar. So when he does that, he's not just doing it to the Sitra Achra, he's doing the Sitra Achra that has defined him. It's like saying, you're a force, a negative force that has become part of my personality, and I want to eliminate it. Like with the wood. You have to strike the wood, because now the wood is not in a state that is catching fire. V'im kain, being that, so that's the situation. V'im kain hu rachik ma'Hashem b'tachlis harichuk. And thus, his identity is far from God as can be. Because even though he's controlling and mastered not to thought, speech, and action, not to act or speak or think about something negative, but it's still able, he still has a desire to do so. The appetite of the animal soul is still part of who he is, fully capable of cravings for things forbidden in the Torah. Shem neged ritzeni yizbarach, that violate God's will. The only difference is, af she'einu misavel la'seisam b'peil mamash chaz v'shalom. Af, let's change the tune. Af she'einu misavel la'seisam b'peil mamash chaz v'shalom. And even though he doesn't desire to actually do it, God forbid, however, you still can't compare him to a tzaddik. Rather, it's just that he doesn't find them utterly repulsive like tzaddikim do. A tzaddik is completely mufrach, completely out of his domain. As explained in chapter 12. So therefore, when he's going to experience that leiv nishbar that we talked about, I'll just go back to the language in the Zohar, mevachin lei, that you crush it or you strike it. You're striking the sitra achre, not just outside, but how it's attached itself to you. Because nefesh habamit is attached to the person, the beinoni even when he's controlling himself, because the nefesh habamit is active. You're just not letting it affect your thought, speech, and action. So now the Alter Rebbe goes back and cites some thoughts that he shared earlier in chapter 24. What? Says, Ubezeh, hu garua umeshukitz, umesoyav yesim ebalechayim atmeim v'shkotzim uremoshim. And in this respect, being that this has attached itself, has become, also defines his personality. So keep in mind again, the etzem and the neshama of a Jew is nefesh elikis. That's no question. But coming into this world, into a body, and to an animal soul is not just some sideshow. You're mislabish in it. So if it's not a tzaddik, this is now affecting your personality. That's why it's so natural and easy for us, God forbid, to desire Elam Hazard. That's the way God made it. We have the power of self-control. But the very desires of this world are part of who we are. It's part of our personality. And in that aspect, being that part of your personality, that causes us to be inferior even to the non-kosher, or you can say the impure animals, more disgusting than insects and more repulsive than reptiles. Keniska Le'il, as mentioned above in chapter 24. Why? Because they never defy God's will. They live out the program that God programmed them to be. That's what they are. Whereas here, it defiles the person to cause him to do things that defy God. Even if he doesn't actually do it, but the ability to consider it. Like he said, doesn't actually do it, but he doesn't find it utterly repulsive. And he's misava, he desires, he's an appetite for that. That's who he is. So, in addition to understanding the greatness that a person has in his soul, remember in this chapter he's addressing what happens when a person has timtum alev and a blockage. So now you have to struggle. It's like you have to recognize the deep blockage. It's like if your person is not aware of their problem, they're not going to solve it. Even if they have very profound, beautiful, divine, transcendent faculties, but if they also have temptations for other things, the opposite, you have to recognize it, and the wood is not going to catch fire, so you need to strike it. And striking it means recognizing that it is disgusting, so to speak. It's like, it's like when you love someone, even one iota that is not appropriate is already something you don't want to have any connection with. It toxifies and contaminates the situation. I've given an example. For example, you love your child. You see a newborn child, even a piece of lint between the toes. You clean it, because there's a certain love, and you don't want to tolerate anything that's opposite of that love. So it's not the focus on destroying the negative, it's the focus on how beautiful it is. So as soon as you see something that's not, you completely eliminate it, because not letting the wood is not catching fire. In this case, the soul is not catching the fire of the divine because of the timtum, because of the blockage. So Alter Rebbe is giving us the eitzah how to deal with that. And it's interesting. It's not even if you're not acting on it or speaking or thinking it, the fact that you're capable of it, which means your identity is defined by it to some extent. That's what you want to eliminate. So it's really about priming yourself to be completely conducive, completely receptive to the divine light, the divine energy. And this is again in addition to all the other eitzes and advice that Alter Rebbe gave us till here. Okay, so now we continue. He brings now a pasuk v'gemer, as the verse states, "I am a worm and not a man." It's a very strong statement. It sounds very derogatory, very self-deprecating. And we know in Torah, you're not supposed to violate yourself. You're not supposed to insult even yourself. So what does this mean? So we have to understand that in context. We're talking about a particular thing. It's like somebody, God forbid, a disease has entered the body. So you're not neutral about it. You're not apathetic. You see it as a real enemy. And you'll do everything to attack the disease, just like white blood cells will attack an infection with a vengeance. It's not because they're angry or because they're aggressive. It's because the health of the body is the most important thing, and this infection or disease is a threat. Just like you see, when someone is in danger, you'll do everything possible to protect the people you love from danger. So you have to remember the context here. Because you can get the impression, you see people who use very much discipline, anger, punitive measures in education of children, of students. That's not what he's talking about here. He's talking about a blockage that you're trying to eliminate. Just like a blockage through disease. And you'll do whatever it takes to clear the paths of the arteries or wherever the disease has attacked in order to create health. So that's what the verse is saying. I am a worm. He's saying, think I am a worm. My identity has been contaminated and I'm identifying with this worm, with this negative energy, the sitra achra. The verses in Psalms and Tehillim, Chav Bei Zayin 22:7. So he's basically identifying and saying, I'm being honest. Awareness of the problem is half the cure. And this is the definition of the awareness. Now, you have to keep in mind the other side, that the Beini still identifies with his divine soul. His Nefesh Elokis is active, not only active, is the dominant force that's controlling the animal soul. Nevertheless, because this Nefesh Habamis is there, even when you're in the deepest level of inspiration, middle of davening, like he explained in chapter 12, so Alter Rebbe adds now in a bracket, V'gam k'shmisgaberes boy, nafshe elokis lo'eira avel Hashem b'shas ha'tfilah. And even when the Beini's divine soul overpowers during prayer, overpowers the animal soul and subdues it, arousing a lo'erer ha'avel Hashem b'shas ha'tfilah, to arouse a very strong, intense love for God, Eine be'emes la'mite legamri. Even though it's a emes, like he spoke later in chapter 13 in Tanya, you can't say it's not authentic, but you can't call it emes la'mite, not absolutely authentic, in a perfect sense. Ma'acha shechelefes ve'everes achar atfilah. since it dissipates and goes away after the prayer. Kinis Galil Seif Perik Yud Gimel, as mentioned above at the end of chapter 13. So interesting to note here, the Alter Rebbe is now cited chapter 12, 13, and 24. Because this chapter is not divorced from and not separated from those chapters. It's all part of a whole buildup of how a person develops self-mastery and self-control over his life. Here we're addressing the blockage, the timtum alev that he spoke about, the wood that doesn't catch, the soul that's blocked. So what do you do with that blockage? You have to dislodge it, and dislodge it takes effort. You ever see something is locked up or trapped? You can't just use regular strength. You have to really strike it and really tug at it, all the things necessary to unplug and unclog the blockage. So that's why it's so critical to understand the Nefesh HaBamis' effect on us. If a person didn't have Timtum Alev, and it was the matter of the divine soul and the animal soul, as we learned in earlier chapters 12, 13, that they both battle with each other, and then the Nefesh HaLikis has its say, Moyach Shalt Alev, and the Eibishter Emed Litzad Yamin, like we learned in chapter 13, and supports 2 against 1, basically. Zev Zeh Shefton, 2 Sheftim, 2 judges, both state their opinion, and you're not just acting on your animal soul, you're allowing your divine soul to speak, so God will side with the divine soul, and you'll have the ability to control the animal soul. You would not need this extra push, this dislodging of a blockage. And even then, when the Nefesh HaLikis dominates, it's not Emes Lamite because it dissipates after davening. But here we have an additional issue here. There's a real blockage. So the blockage requires dislodging, so you require even more effort to put the Nefesh HaBamis in its place. And recognize that it's like a worm, like a disease. Like he says. A toxic infection, spiritually speaking. And so then so you'll say, 1 second, but I'm inspired during davening. He says, fine, you're inspired, but it doesn't last. So that tells you how kind of impact it has. And it's more important to emphasize. So we emphasized that in chapter 12 as well. But now there's this additional blockage, the timtum, that he's talking about. Okay. So now we continue on in chapter 29. So now he continues and says, after explaining the importance of dislodging, which requires striking or shattering, or the different words we used, crushing the blockage in order for the wood to catch, in this case the soul to catch fire, the divine fiery love. So after explaining that, the Alter Rebbe now is going to go further and give us more language, more tools in how we complete that dislodging. Because let's say you keep working and it's hard for you to unblock the blockage. And keep in mind, this is not about being negative and being gvuradik, disciplined. This is about recognizing the negative energy that's blocking your ability to reach your greatest heights. Like an infection, God forbid, a disease that doesn't let you be the best you can be. So now the Alter Rebbe continues that till now we've been talking about that which is natural to a person. We have the Nefesh HaBamis is part of who we are and defines us. But what about also our actions? The fact is that the sins a person does also adds to the infection. It's not just what we spoke about, the power of the Nefesh HaBamis. So the Alter Rebbe continues, Ubefrat, what we talked before that some call ego deflating sessions. In other words, working on sublimating and taming the ego. Becomes even stronger when you know, befrat kishi yisker, when you remember and recall tumas nafshe bechatas nurim, how the soul is contaminated from the sins of youth. That's an expression, a chazal, for anything of sins connected to a person's sexuality. And it's called in the youth because when they're in youthful, when a person's hormones and sexuality begins to develop, this is one of the nisyanis, one of the challenges. Comes from the Pasuk in Tehillim 25:7, Chafei Zayin. So even though we're talking about a Beni who's done tshuva over any of these things, nevertheless, you have to remember where you came from. Ma'ayin bosa, like the Mishnah says in Pirkei Avos, mitipas rucha, from a drop, a smelly drop, basically. So he says it's all part of the ability to dislodge the disease by recognizing how terrible it is. So remembering chatas nurim, v'abgam she'osa b'elyenim, and the blemish, pagam, blemish, damage, wound. There's a lot of different ways you could touch pagam that was caused in the upper worlds due to these sins. Because how a person behaves down below affects all the higher worlds. V'shamu l'mayla mazman. And when you talk about above, it's higher than time. So even if it's something that came from your youth, years ago, your past, but above, the effect is l'mayla mazman. U'ki'ilu pogam v'nitma hayem chaz v'shalom mamish. And therefore, it's as if the person had actually defiled himself and caused the blemish, caused the wound. Today, God forbid. Now you could say, one second, doesn't tshuva repair even the past? And by a beinani, we say like kilu lechata, the expression. Kilu me'elim lechata. He's in a matzav like he had never sinned, but that is by the person. But above, there is a memory of it. Va'af shekvar osa tshuva nechena. The Alter Rebbe continues, and even though the person has repented in an acceptable way, tshuva nechena, proper tshuva, hari ikar tshuva belev, the most important element of tshuva is emotional component in the heart. Va'alev yesh ba b'chinas madregas rabbis. And emotions can be experienced across a very wide range. V'hakol lefi mashu adam, all depending on the individual circumstances. Ulefi azman v'amokim, and on the particular time and place, ki yudu liyedim, as is known by intelligent people. Which means that even though you did tshuva what was back then, but now you've grown and matured. And you always want to grow. So all this is about being very honest in your self-appraisal. So even if the tshuva is done, and in truth, the real tshuva, but a person is always growing, and you don't just say, oh, since I did tshuva. So even though the sin is not there anymore, that was erased, and that was taken care of, but still, a person is constantly growing, and relative to where you are now, there is something that you want to be aware of, which helps you, so-called, again, remove the blockage. It's like it says in Chassidus, why we say Tachnun after Shemoneh Esrei. after all the davening of Shemoneh Esrei, we should be cleansed from all sins. So it says once you reach higher levels, now you recognize a blemish that you wouldn't have seen before. It's like the first time around it was fine. But now you become even cleaner, so to speak. You start seeing even a speck, a stain that you wouldn't have seen earlier. Well, says the Alter Rebbe. Therefore now, at this time in your life, even long after you've done tshuva, because remember, he sees a blockage that's not allowing the fire to catch. Remember that. That's a key point. So he's seeing that. That means there's things that are causing it to be that way. A certain desensitization which won't give out to the light of its soul. Like we said before, the example of a piece of wood that the fire doesn't catch. Here the person, the fiery love of God is not catching because of the timtum, because of the blockage. So now that he's in this place, the implication is that even though the tshuva was sufficient at its time, today, due to your maturity, this tshuva is not acceptable. It's not enough. Mavdilim, and the sins are separating the person from God. That's one way to explain it. And as such, that's his awareness tells us, okay, you know what? I had enough strength to dislodge the blocks from the past, but now I see there's still blockage. That means that now I'm in a more mature, more developed place, and I have to now deal with that. The Alter Rebbe gives another possibility. Even if you completely did tshuva and the past is cleansed completely, so giving the example of the disease, since you still see a disease, it means that maybe you still have to, the disease is not completely gone. Some remission. Some regression, I should say. It's not total remission. So a person therefore has to address it. Another scenario, so even though the tshuva is acceptable, God wants to lift the person to a higher level of tshuva. So it's not because the tshuva is not enough for the new level that you're at, but he wants to lead you to a higher level. That should come from deeper place in the heart. So you could say, what's the difference between these two explanations? Well, one is that you're more mature and therefore there's still things that are blocking you. The second is not so much that it's still blocking you, but it's more because God wants you to elevate to a higher level, not because something still remains from the past. Well, Omar David, and that's why David says, V'chatosi negdi tzomid. David says in Tehillim, Chof Nun Aleph Hey, 51:5, and my sin is always before me. And you can explain it in both ways. What it means is before you did tshuva. So it could be because now you need a higher level of tshuva, the previous tshuva is not enough, or Hashem wants a deeper experience of your heart, a deeper part of your heart. And we'll stop here. So you see, fascinating how the Alter Rebbe is analyzing and dissecting us, each of us, in a way that we can really figure out how to reach the highest possible levels. TanyaApplied.com is our landing page where you can find this and all previous programs. You can also submit questions there. Everyone have a very good Tavach.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.